I am very excited and thankful to be joined by Belinda Spalding-Jones this afternoon. Belinda is not only a running friend, but she is also a counseling psychologist in private practice in Johannesburg. Belinda, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here, Rudy.
Belinda, so to all of us, I think all earthlings, since, say, beginning of last year, South Africans around March 2020, the whole reality of loss has become a part of almost our daily lives. I think back then it was almost the theory of loss. We thought that we're going to lose freedom. We thought we're going to lose income or loved ones, as we've so painfully discovered since then. So around that, maybe a first question to you: what are you seeing and hearing in our minds at this point in time, and how are people processing all of this? And yeah, maybe, I mean, that's now three questions already, but how are you helping people to process all of what we're experiencing right now around loss?
Well, Rudy, I think, first off, when you say, there's three questions in one, the reason for sort of the multitudes of questions that come when one talks about loss is that there are so many layers of loss. Is the loss that we have experienced in the last year or so is multi-layered and has to be thought of on so many different levels. It's not just the physical loss, which is excruciatingly painful, but it's loss on, financial and metaphorical and psychic, structures are all sort of up in the air. So, I'm not surprised when we start to talk about it that one goes off in all sorts of tangents because, the loss is huge. But, I suppose just when you say, what are we looking at? The one is that we're starting to have seen very, very physical losses. When this lockdown started, it was just an imagining. And there was thoughts about what could be, and people were trying to, keep a brave face. But the reality of people's individual losses are really coming to bear now. And they are extreme, actually. So, I think that it's helping people come to terms with the specific losses that they have experienced that now are not only painfully coming to bear, but are also, one's unsure of when they're going to end. So that is, part of the difficulty, I think, as this year has started, is there's a fatigue with the beginning of the year because we've been thrown back into something that we thought was going to finish and which now doesn't have an end. And I think that at the moment in particular, that's one of the things that's quite frightening is, when will this end? What is this going to be looking like? What is this world that we're living in?
Belinda, you used such reassuring, in some ways, language to actually name it for what it is, and you used the word extreme. None of us have been pushed to this level, just in terms of all those layers you mentioned. And I think maybe it's a difficult thing to actually acknowledge that word extreme, but it's also real, and it's also honest to say it is extreme. We have never done this before. We don't know.
Well, besides obviously the physical losses, which, we can come to, one of the biggest losses that I think people are coming to terms with is that the world that we knew is gone. And it is gone in a very extreme way. I think last year people were, and So I think our sound is a little bit tricky. So I'm just going to repeat what I said there around, part of the loss being that the world that we knew has disappeared. And, by nature, we are creatures that want the world to make sense. And we've been trained to think about the world in a particular way and for it to make sense in a particular way. And what the pandemic has done is it's just played havoc with that. The world doesn't make sense. What was safe, what was comforting, is now suddenly dangerous. Something as simple as a hug was probably the most comforting and safest thing that you could get. And suddenly now that is a weapon. It is mind-blowing, actually. And that is why things are so peculiar, actually, and why people are battling, because suddenly the world doesn't make sense anymore. And people are grappling with, how do you make sense of a new and a dangerous world? That is extreme. So, you're absolutely right. It's the extreme nature of what has happened is making us all feel a little bit crazy.
Yeah, it is indeed. Belinda, one sort of phrase that I keep on hearing is that people would say, when in response to the question, "How are you doing?" people would say, I'm doing okay, or I'm doing fine, or I'm struggling a bit, but I still have my job, or I live in a comfortable home, and then people, well, we go into sort of, I don't know what to call it. It's almost like a self-correction where we go, okay, so I'm not really giving myself the permission to complain, because I've still got a job and I've still got a home, or whatever those things that we sort of almost try to grasp. What you say more about that thing in us? I think there's a name for it, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's, I suppose, on that same theme of trying to make sense of a world where it is your way of saying, well, where am I in the world? How do I fare in the world? What is my loss compared to another person's loss? So there is that feeling of, sort of by comparison, my comparative loss is not so bad, so then I'm fine. And, physically I'm fine, so I must be fine. And, there's two sides to that coin, because, on the one side, that's, I suppose, part of our own resilience, where you go, okay, well, what have I got to help me keep going? The other side, which I think you might be alluding to, is part of perhaps denying how difficult it actually is to face and digest the things that have been taken away because they're intangible. So when the loss is intangible, which is, some of these things that we've been talking about, it's sometimes hard to validate the enormity of them and why we feel so bad. And so people can find it hard to articulate and find the words to describe, or even feel that they're allowed to say, Jeepers, I'm really struggling, but I'm not quite sure why, because not a lot has changed. When in actual fact, so much has changed. The world, their world view and safety has changed, but it's not something that's tangible. And of course, the real danger of not being able to articulate and acknowledge the loss is you can't digest it. You can't digest it. You can't make sense of it. You can't work out what it means for you and where to put it. And as human beings, that's one of the things we need to do with our feelings, is to be able to digest and make sense, so that we can work out what it is that we can do with it, even if that is just bearing it or articulating, oh, that's why I feel so bad. Oh, okay, that's what that feeling is.
That's I love the word digest. I love that because that makes sense to me. We're trying, sort of in our minds and hearts, we're trying to to come to terms with this. And as you've described it, we try to make sense and we go into that mode of digesting. And if we don't give words to it, we sort of are perhaps sort of likely, or it's possible that we can become stuck and feel lonely because I now need to bury these feelings of fear or anxiety or uncertainty, whatever it may be. Obviously it's on a massive sort of range of complicated feelings that we are experiencing. Belinda, I want to venture into the let's say um, the terrain where people with children, for example, find themselves, where parents are seeking and trying to guide their children through this. And it can be, let's not put an age to these children, but anyone from just toddler stage or a bit later or teenager or early adolescent, whatever it may be. How do we guide our children? Because I think parents, I've certainly done it, I'll admit. I have played that card to my kids saying, well, get your head around online school and face, the task that is ahead of you, just do it, because look at your Wi-Fi and your food and, your shelter. Help us to to perhaps guide our children in this.
So possibly that's a lovely, segue from the word digest, because one of the things that human beings need most, and what so much of parenting is about, is helping your children digest the experiences that they're having in the world so that they don't feel overwhelmed. And one of the biggest difficulties for parents is that they themselves are overwhelmed. So if we go back a step to go forward, one of the reasons that parents need to take good care and be aware of their own feelings and digest their own feelings is if they haven't done that, their capacity to do that for their children is going to be really low. So if they are telling themselves all the time to cope, get on with it, and don't see what's hard, the only thing they're going to be able to do with their children is to do the same thing. So, that's the first part for parents, is to take good care and find spaces and people through which to make sense of what is happening to them and what their losses are. Because then when we look at those different age groups, once a parent has done that with themselves, they are more equipped to help a child digest what it is that they're struggling with. Because, for example, online schooling, one of the things that children are struggling with online schooling is what they have lost, right? And at different ages, the children have lost different things. But one of the things that school is about separating. Actually, it's about saying goodbye to mom and dad. Mom and dad saying, cheerio, see you later. And that's gone. So actually, everybody at homeschooling is battling with the fact that, you're not going through a normal developmental stage and all the things that it brings, which is a goodbye and a hello. And a lot of those feelings get piled onto the Wi-Fi that didn't work, the homework that's too difficult, the badly behaved children, because something that's supposed to be happening is not happening. So one of the first things is to digest that it's hard. Goodness, this is difficult. We're all struggling with it. What are you struggling with the most? And one can name it and say it. It's not that we're going to fix it immediately, but we're finding a space to just articulate it. What are parents, struggling with the most? They can't go to work. They didn't sign up to be a teacher, actually. They don't know how to teach their children, so they are frustrated too. And then once you've articulated it, at least, one can be kind, both with oneself and one child, to say, you're right, this is jolly hard. Before you can get to so what are we going to do about it? So what are we going to do with this thing that is particularly difficult? And the separation is particularly hard for adolescents, because the very thing that adolescents are supposed to be doing is saying cheers to their parents, spending more time with their friends, going out, experimenting, doing naughty things, hooking up with, all different things in the world. And now everyone's saying, don't stay with your parents, because the only thing that's safe is your home and your home front. So, there's when you say, what can we do to help? The first thing is to digest what's happening, and that it's hard, and what does it mean? Then you can get into, so what can we each do? And at different ages and stages, what one can do around independence or making sense. People are quite creative, actually, when you get to it, but that they can't go to creative until they felt that they heard and something has been digested.
What I hear is that thing of, when we used to fly, where they tell you, give yourself the oxygen first, put the oxygen mask on your face, because if you are not breathing, you cannot assist somebody else who is struggling to find air. And I hear that principle in the parent-child relationship, where you are telling us, reminding us that we need to digest ourselves and have a place or a person or somebody to talk to and to voice and to word. And then once we've caught a breath, we can then return almost better to our children and the people we are responsible for. Belinda, yeah, sorry.
And as much as one would like to deny the loss is real. So both not denying the loss in ourselves, it doesn't make it better, but it does create room for an acknowledgement that an extreme thing is going down. We're not all skipping around saying life is good and we're feeling great. In fact, life is really tricky at the moment and we're not feeling so great. We're having to be quite creative and quite ingenious about how to uplift ourselves. But you can only do that when you are acknowledging why you're having to do that. When you're saying, life is fine, there's no problems, something doesn't make sense.
Linda, maybe, I have a very strong sense that there is a massive amount that we can still talk about, and maybe in a month or two's time or whenever we can perhaps resume this chat. But I would like to ask you, if you, I think most people know that to be the kind of listener, for example, that you are, is quite a, it's quite a difficult thing. So most people are not good listeners. Won't you give us listening 101, if possible at all, and just give us perhaps one or two things, one or two, I'm very hesitant to call them tips, but one or two remarks that can help us all to be better listeners, because you just referred to space as well. A lot of this is about the space in which to express, and the space to be kind, and the space to catch a breath. Won't you just guide us if you can? Of course you can.
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I think that number one rule is to start to listen to yourself. Because if you are refusing to listen to what's going on inside of you, or are frightened of what's going on inside of you, you cannot hear what anybody else is saying. And the ears that you use to listen to yourself will be the ears that you use to listen to another. So if you are listening to yourself in a very impatient, very punitive kind of way, like, come on now, pull yourself towards yourself and just get on with it, this is not so bad. Well, there's some days where we might need that. If you're only ever doing that, that's the only ear that you'll ever have. Whereas if you have your own ear to yourself, to where you say, I wonder why. I wonder why today is so hard. What is making it so hard? Just that simple question of asking yourself, you can ask another person, I wonder why it's so hard today. I wonder why they are so grumpy and so impossible. I wonder what is going on. So the word I wonder gives one space to be both kind and have space, where you are literally wondering, I wonder what is going on. And sometimes that's a good sort of segue, and you might not know. You can also, you don't have to be a magician. You don't have to be a mind reader. You can say out loud to anybody else, I wonder what's going on with you today. You seem so grumpy, or you seem so irritable. I wonder why. I wonder what's going on for you.
I cannot tell you how, I wonder what the word is, refreshing that phrase, the two words together, I wonder. It's powerful. It's very powerful not really as a tool, because we should be careful, I think, of going into that fixing kind of mode. But I would like to thank you for those two words. I wonder. I wonder why I'm feeling so scared. I wonder why I'm so impatient today. So thank you for that, Belinda. And I really hope we can talk again soon or sometime. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you for your wisdom and your insight.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to chat to you. Okay.